Hi, everyone. Hello. Welcome. Welcome to my talk for A Landscape Holds You Still. This is a slideshow of images that I want to share with you all and to kind of, be able to allow folks to see the work, even if you were not able to travel down to San Diego in the last 2 weeks that it's been up to experience the work in person. Definitely, I want to, continue to stay in conversation with my community. And yes, I'm so happy that many of you are able to be here today and taking interest in the work and in my practice. Again, feel free to drop any questions or comments you have in the chat. I would love to hear if people are resonating with specific images and connecting or drawn to some of the photographs I'll be sharing. And I'll get started. I'll get started now. So my name's Arlene Mejorado, and I'm a photographer, an artist with a lens-based practice. I have been finishing up my MFA here at UC San Diego. And it's a 3-year program. And while I've been here, I've been making a lot of my work in different places. Specifically, I've spent a lot of time in Guadalajara, Mexico, making work around my grandmother's home there. And then I've also been making work in the San Fernando Valley. I decided to focus my thesis work on the San Fernando Valley, which is the northern half of the Los Angeles city of LA proper. And it's often just considered this kind of no place or a place that doesn't have a real kind of sense of identity, which I always find to be really interesting. And I'll get more into that. Okay, so here is kind of the opening image to A Landscape Holds You Still. It's a curtain to the crater. The valley is often called a crater because it's surrounded by mountains. And it can feel very difficult to kind of go in and out of the valley. Sometimes people that do not live in the valley don't go to the valley, and people that are in the valley often stay in the valley. But it is half of LA, and it's really interesting that because of the structure of it, how much it really determines the culture of the San Fernando Valley. So with this image, I installed the curtain, and I found a kind of very domestic referencing kind of curtain that is sheer, and installed it within the view of the valley. This is in Porter Ranch, and I call it the ET view because a lot of ET, the movie, the Spielberg film, was filmed in this part of the San Fernando Valley, and you had these like really high up views. And so with the curtain, I was thinking a bit about how I'm starting to view the valley as somebody from the inside, and how that creates a level of kind of like a filter, which I'm gazing at this place. It also made me think a lot about opacity and the ways in which I'm kind of keeping a level of opacity in showing you the valley, and that there's things that maybe will be more visible or legible to people that are from the region or myself, and the ways that also it's impossible for me to see it from a different position, and how that kind of determines my gaze as well. All right, so this is a view of the exhibition. Most of it, it was in the gallery, one of the galleries we have here. And I decided to do kind of it may look like a more traditional show, and, photographs that are framed on the walls. But what I found is that a lot of the installation work that I'm making are inside the photographs. I'm working within the landscape in the valley, site specific, and making images in the space that where I'm working with the space, and often installing whether it's banners, backdrops, sculptural works, and then photographing that. And so my hand becomes inseparable from the photograph as well, in the ways that it's actually, forming the image. And so this is where the Los Angeles River begins. This is an image made in Canoga Park, which is kind of the north northwest part of the San Fernando Valley. It's kind of at the very end, kind of close to Calabasas. And this is the oldest high school in the San Fernando Valley. It's called Canoga Park High School. And you can see where the two channels connect and become the Los Angeles River. So you're witnessing here like the beginning of what that river is. And that's the river that runs through the entire city and ends in Long Beach. So what I was really drawn to was the awkward space of land, this kind of triangular piece that was very inaccessible for me. I actually wanted to photograph from that position, but it's closed off. And I was interested in that kind of awkward space of land. And it started making me think about the idea of these middle pieces of land that kind of exist throughout the valley, like medians, street islands, dividers, in this case, the river, where they're kind of these liminal sites that don't have a specific use, but you know, they're not meant to be for us to stand in or to be in. And I started to connect that to my own complicated relationship to the valley and complicated like sense of home and positionality. And that felt a bit, oh, and here is also some other images as I was kind of, you know, doing this like visual research in the San Fernando Valley. I started photographing a lot of medians throughout various parts and looking at what do those sites actually look like? What do these liminal spaces look like? You know, they're often places where there's cracked cement and weeds growing, and or some are more well curated depending what neighborhood you are in, and have you know, like proper gardening happening in the middle and upkeeping. And then a lot of them have signs that say, you know, no pedestrian crossing or pedestrians prohibited, more often than not. And so there are these spaces that are meant to keep people off of them. And then there are just, again, awkward sites. And here's just a detail of like one of them on Reseda. And then from that river image, this kind of feels a bit of like an invert of that, because now we're looking at a triangular figure through the other side. And with this image, it's called Portrait at the Median with the Family Baby Blanket. And so I was thinking with this image, I'm in the neighborhood of North Hills where I grew up, and I have a lot of my earliest childhood memories. We grew up there in the 90s, which is a very politically charged time, as a lot of Latinx and Asian communities were migrating to the United States, moving into Los Angeles, transforming the city. It grew by 17% from the mid 80s to the early 90s. And there was a wave of migration. Our family was subject of that. And I was thinking about how also a lot of people of color were very much identified or drawn to the Raiders. My mom would go to Raiders games at the LA Coliseum. She purchased this blanket, and it became the baby blanket that was passed down from me to my brothers. And it's not an actual baby blanket, but what I did was, because we still had this blanket in the family, I invited a close friend of mine that grew up somewhere near this neighborhood to kind of stand in at the median with her child. And I did a portrait of them with the baby blanket. And so we have this kind of iconography of the Raiders to mark a time, you know, but it's also something that's ongoing, that's kind of gone beyond just that time period, as, you know, a lot of families continue to follow the team and the Raiders. And this isn't so much about football. It's what it's really about is kind of that socio-political moment of the 90s, the early 90s, and also the relationship that my family had to that time, and growing up in North Hills and kind of drawing back to those memories. And I remember, you know, crossing this median, but it wasn't a place you could ever really stop and be in. And so it was interesting to work in this space where you have cars and traffic like coming and going. It's a very uncomfortable place sonically. It's very uncomfortable when there's like traffic, and then you can see the pedestrian prohibited sign in the back. So what is it to kind of work in an uncomfortable space that is not at all like accommodating to or welcoming to like just a human body? And then here we have another image I made with Diana Barahona so it's called Diana at the Median. And Diana is a friend of mine who also is drawn to return to Reseda. It's a place that she was born into and lived in for the early years of her life. And when we were in the neighborhood, she talked about, pointing out the church that she was baptized in, and around the corner, the apartment building that she lived in with her family, and then moved away. But it's a place that calls her back and that continues to inform her. So I had the idea of like allowing her to do a portrait of herself in the Median. And so I was working with Mamiya RZ67 camera, working mostly with Ektachrome film and some Kodak Gold film. And so I invited her to kind of stand in the Median, compose the image, gave her like a shutter release, and she was able to make some images of herself sitting in the Median. And I think with this idea we had of like, again, being uncomfortable and leaning into that uncomfortability of not really feeling like you have a place within the cityscape. And like her, we are like first generation people that like have always dealt with a complicated sense of home, and our placemaking is a challenge that we're constantly reminded of, feeling perpetually from somewhere else or outside of the landscape that we're in. And so this image is one of her looking out and photographing herself. And then now I'm here doing a self-portrait as well, kind of a follow-up to Diana's image. Decided to photograph myself, and here I am on Sherman Way. This is near Beckford, where there are these apartments where a lot of my family lived. When they migrated, a lot of them lived in like apartments kind of lined up like 2 or 3. And so as they were there, every time I kind of pass by that intersection, I always think about like the ways that my family started in living in the Sacramento Valley. And, so thinking about that, and also like as somebody that doesn't necessarily have a home in the Valley now, but it's been constantly in movement and moving around, and throughout my whole life, I've never like felt necessarily the stability of a single home. I feel like I'm still in that place. And so this is kind of an image to honor that. And then these are untitled images of just me kind of rehearsing, playing with the Median again, and, installing in these uncomfortable and frankly, semi-dangerous spaces, with the traffic. And I picked a time of the day that I knew there'd be less traffic, that it would be maybe a bit safer to install and work. And I was just kind of thinking about the idea of like lifting the curtain and showing the landscape, and then kind of letting it subside and withholding a bit of the view again. Here we have an image called Bedroom Backdrop behind a storefront glass. So this image is a bit complicated. I think when people were looking at it in the gallery, it can be a bit deceiving what you're actually looking at. But what I did here is a kind of a reference to a project I did in the past, where I printed banners, large vinyl banners of images from my archive. I was really drawn to an image that I had of a bedroom. It was the bedroom that me and my mom and my cousin lived in, and I have memories. Those are some of my earliest memories, living in this bedroom, and it was seen as a very like kind of posh and like upscale because of the type of furniture we had. It was matching furniture. And so this, I wanted to print this picture out. And I thought about, I don't have a place to really place this archive anymore, or this memory. So what would it look like to kind of put it in the external space? Because to me, a lot of times what we see, in the external space is drawn back to memories, and we kind of can break through surface when we're seeing a place, because we're thinking about more of like our interior lives within that landscape. So I thought, what is a way that I can kind of like make this happen, or like visually represent that? And so I worked with a business in Winnetka and installed the banner behind the the storefront glass. And then from the outside, I set up the camera and started photographing. And you have a compression of the background, the foreground, and the midground into like kind of one frame. So it looks a bit like a double exposure or like a sandwich negative. And from there, you're getting pedestrians and people that are passing by. You're getting signifiers of like the neighborhood with, you know, things that are in Spanish and the area code of the neighborhood, which is 818. And then you also get the Vallarta supermarket. So people know about Vallarta. That's happened to be what was across the street. But like Vallarta is a supermarket that started in the Sacramento Valley, and now there's a lot of them. But I thought all of those things were like really prominent and very much like revealing of the neighborhood where you're at. Yeah. And so this is an image that I did actually in 2021 that's not part of A Landscape Holds You Still. This is from another project called Breathing Exteriors, where I took an archive family banner, family photographs, and made them into banners and then installed them in sites. And I thought of this as like kind of layering memories into the landscape, which is something I'm, you know, currently obsessed with doing. And with this one, this is a portrait of myself in a pool when I was learning how to swim. And so I didn't really have access to this pool at the time. And so what I did was go to a public pool that was nearby. This is during COVID time. So like a lot of pools are drained and empty. You can see like the skateboard marks on the ground from people using the pool without water. And then I rephotographed myself. So I thought this was an interesting take on a kind of like self-portrait, because it's an image that already exists of yourself. But what does it mean to revisit yourself in a different way and to maybe care for yourself in a different way? And like, how can you do that through photography? What ended up happening was this image where also like I was very distant from myself, and it wasn't necessarily the intention, but you know, there's just like small child that's so far away. But also like I felt a bit of like this reacquaintance. So it's interesting to look at yourself in that way. And now I want to segue into this other image that is a picture of my mother standing in a pool and re-embodying her childhood memory, her childhood photograph at a beach in Mexico. So there's an image of my mom that I hold dear to me that's of her when she was maybe like 12 or 13 years old, and she's standing in a beach in Mexico, and a lot of the beaches like around Nayarit area are very shallow. And so she's standing in this beach and like the water only hits her like below her knee. And she just looks really serene and beautiful. And it's kind of been really nice in this process of this work to like kind of start to build up a new way of seeing my mother, starting from her archives and from her as a child, and like really spending time with images of her and letting the photographs of my mother as a child, like, and as you know, a teen and adolescent and everything up until before she became my mother, like just to let those images kind of speak to me and learn more about her this way. And I feel like there was this kind of chronological progression to being able to photograph my mom. And so this is the first time I ever decided that I could really like make a portrait of her. And it had a lot to do with like kind of also where we were at, you know, with even with like our own relationship and understanding her better. And so it was really powerful to like, you know, create an image of her. And we decided to return to the pool that I grew up swimming in and learning how to swim, which was like part of this apartment complex in North Hills. And so after many attempts, we finally got access to this pool. And I was able to kind of stage this image, kind of allowing her to re-embody herself from that other archive image. And what's really interesting too is just the way of like a kind of a comment on the awkwardness again, and that like you can't fully return to the origin of that moment, and you're using a pool to represent something like this other body of water. And you're letting the landscape and the ambient conditions to kind of frame the photograph. So, or frame her, you know, and so that was kind of also part of it. But also I think my mom tends to always present herself in images in a way that I think transcends the environment. And I think that has a lot to do with like just her ethos in life. And this is an image called Girl Holding Photograph of My Mother when she was younger. And so that's the actual image that I'm referring to, is her at the beach. And this is an image that I made in 2021 where we had somebody, my nieces, like play with archives and play with images and handling them. And so this beautiful image came out of that, was just this like really tender image of like holding a photograph of my mother and seeing her in a different way, and kind of almost working backwards to understanding, and to also like demonstrate kind of a preciousness and protection and care and activation of this archive. Okay, and then what I ended up doing was, you know, because this became a strategy, was inviting other people in my family to try the same thing. And so here we have handling her mother's archives, Winnetka Park, California. This was where my nieces, Rachel and Natalia, started to, so they selected images from their mother's archive, who has a wonderful archive. I think a lot of moms from the 90s are going to have like incredible archives. So, you know, she had that, and so they started to do that, and I'm just photographing the process of that. I mean, they're semi-performing because we set up, they chose like the type of bed sheet they wanted to use as the backdrop. You can see this chain link fence in the background, which again is the blending of the interior and the exterior of it. We went to the park, a park that means a lot to their family. And that's where they started to do this and handling the photographs. And I wanted to photograph that, and for them to kind of, you know, meditate on these images. And then from there, on that same day that we were at the park, Natalia, the youngest daughter, I photographed her. I did just a portrait of her. This is during the flower super bloom. And you can see, this is a reference to, you know, what is the Valley Girl? You know, the Valley Girl is this funny trope that is very dominated from the West Side Valley, like affluent girls. You know, there's these stereotypes that I think continue to follow us, but you know, there's many kinds of Valley girls. And to me, like, you know, Natalia is someone in my family and someone that I think of, you know, being born and raised in the San Fernando Valley, but not at all what is included in this kind of mainstream pop culture idea of what a Valley girl is, but also has a much of a cultural impact and influence on the world in ways that are not necessarily visibilized. And so this is a install view at the show in the gallery, which the show closes tomorrow night. Sun, color, and textures of the valley. This is an image in Northridge, California. This is an image that is a result of what happens when you're driving and you look out your window, and this is a typical view of what you're going to see. This is like a window view of the valley, and I stopped and I made a photograph because I am so drawn to the awful color palette that is in a lot of places, that I think a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of sprawl that we experience, whether it is San Fernando Valley or we're talking about, like, I don't know, Riverside, Inland Empire, or, you know, South LA, or the South Bay. Like, I think you see these kinds of like walls with these like kind of muddled, like neutral colors, and the porous cement, and you know, the hard cast shadows and the sun. And it's just taken me so many years to learn to find the beauty in this. And I just thought that this was a beautiful moment. And that's really why I wanted to include it in the work, because I wanted it to be about learning how to read the topography around you. And that will segue into this other work. This is kind of, again, another type of rehearsal, or kind of working around this idea of re-embodying a memory. And with this one, it's, I remember drawing on my father's back with a ballpoint pen, and it's a reference to when I was a young child, and my dad ran a landscaping business at the time, and I would draw with a ballpoint pen on his back. He would come home tired and he would just give me a blue ballpoint pen or a black ballpoint pen and just say like, go ahead, draw on my back. And I would do it. And I loved it because I think as a young kid, you're like, this is this big canvas. I mean, to me, you know, it's like you can do anything, and just to have the freedom and to learn how to write on untraditional surfaces, like meaning like not paper, was a really intimate and important memory between me and my father. And I think it's a kind of image that like you don't really see in the world. And I wanted to try it. I don't have like, you know, I couldn't have access to actually doing this with my father. So I had my friend Freddie, who was generous enough to like sit for me and let me just draw on his back over time. And like, you know, I just documented that process. We also did it in the exterior space outside in a parking lot, actually, because again, I don't have necessarily the where I could place these memories, where I can place a lot of the things in my life, as a lot of places have been, there's a level of impermanence, like to housing and to homes, to where you can live, especially in Los Angeles. And so that's a lot of like, my memories are like that. And actually my father became unhoused later in his life. And so a lot of my bonding memories and memories I have with my dad were about meeting at the park, meeting at a random, you know, place around the valley, sometimes meeting up at movie theaters or bookstores, anywhere where we could just be, just to be, you know, was where like memories would take place. So a lot of times they were in the exterior space, and, you know, and that was also very much a personal space. So this is the image that I ended up choosing, that I printed for the show. And I think I was drawn to it, one, because you could see a little bit of Freddie's face. I think that my hands felt here, like this is the moment where I started to remember as I was doing it. Like I could remember that I would like kind of connect the dots on his back, you know, and any kind of marks on his back, I would just start like connecting those dots. And so, yeah, I chose this image. This is like a landscape, a view of Silmar. Silmar is like, and Silmar, San Fernando, Pacoima are like more the east side of the San Fernando Valley. And I wanted to kind of just mark that image, or like make an image around that. That's where a lot of my dad's family is from and grew up. And so I have a lot of memories there too. And it's just a beautiful landscape. And I've become more interested in landscapes. So now this kind of, we can go into this work, which is this is called the Film Set Dividers at Plaza del Valle. So while I was making work in the San Fernando Valley and North Hills, Panorama City is a neighboring neighborhood to North Hills. And so I went to go look for food at Plaza del Valle, which is like, if people know the valley, like that's the spot. There's so much food there, and you know, it's like a strip mall you can walk through. But I was met with these dividers, these large tea stands, and they were meant to cover up a movie set. And so I photographed it, and I talked to some of the crew there, and they were telling me that it was like a film with Brad Pitt and George Clooney where they're going to play hitmen. And they were filming inside of this like salon where, like, I remember my cousin had her wedding. And so I just thought that was really interesting because it's like shaping the landscape, and it's like this pop-up that's meant to keep, you know, monitor who comes in and who comes out. And I mean, it's blatantly a very much a different type of curtain than the ones I've been kind of showing you. And so that leads me to this image, which is called Rosita Sign Self-Portrait with my cousin Carlos. And this image is a direct kind of reference to artist Sen Quang Chi. Sen Quang Chi was a queer artist making really incredible work, especially in the 70s. He was Chinese American and was from New York, and kind of one of the projects he did was called East Meets West. And so he would photograph himself in front of different landmarks, especially like the Hollywood sign and the Paramount Pictures studios. And so I thought that was really humorous because he was talking about like cultural tensions, a bit of touching on xenophobia. And so I wanted to kind of try something similar. I was also inspired by my cousin's sunglasses because, like, whenever I photograph him, he doesn't want to take his sunglasses off. So I always thought like, you just purposely look really cool. And so I invited him to do a portrait with me in front of the Reseda sign. This is an old movie theater that's been closed down for a long time. But it's also kind of like a local type of landmark. Like if you're not from Reseda, you might not know much about it, but it's I thought of it as kind of our Hollywood sign. And because so many movies are being made in the San Fernando Valley, yet they're not really marked, or the valley is not really seen as a destination for tourism, or a place that is like a part of the this visible landscape for the world. And so also I invited my cousin because he works behind the scenes. He works in lighting, he works in studios, and he's part of that production and those people that I think are like the really doing the heavy lifting in places like Hollywood and for entertainment. And so I thought, what if it was for us to do this image, as two people that grew up in the 90s in LA, in the Valley. Like we experienced white flight in every neighborhood we moved into. Vividly remember this. And just to photograph ourselves almost as like tourists in our own town, and like having this sign. And here's like the references to San Juan Chi's work, where he photographed himself in front of the Hollywood Hills, in front of the Hollywood sign. And then this is him in front of Paramount Pictures. So yeah, I think it's also a way to honor his work, because I think he really speaks to me. And now I was gonna just kind of reference this image, Fotografías de Los Ángeles en la Cocina, where this was again an image I had done in 2021, but I had taken images of just like, mundane everyday life archives from family, and like scanned them and tried to make them look kind of like, almost like film strips, like repetitive memories, things that are just kind of continuously moving along, but like they don't change much. And so I created this image, and then we installed it in the kitchen. So it was a way to kind of bring the lives that we lived out in Los Angeles and place them in this kitchen in Mexico, where our family, my grandmother's home, where our family lived. And so then thinking more about interior lives, I made these images that were in my aunt's home in Pacoima. And these are just, I kind of pointed the camera towards parts of her home that to me felt like they hadn't changed since growing up, and, spending time in her home and living, well, not living with her, but like, visiting. And so this is like kind of quintessential old like valley kind of interior homes, but this is a recent image. And then here we have an image called Street Side Hearts, and it's in Silmar, California, where I just photographed a fragment of what is kind of the remnants of a street side memorial that was there. Sometimes things get left behind. And so I was thinking a bit about, again, the way that we project our intimate lives into the exterior space. I think that street side memorials are very much a part of that. I would have to say I was really impacted by the year 2020, both from like the way that COVID happened and the ways that people had to live out their grieving in public, and the ways that people had to find ways to, demonstrate their grieving and honoring, life and death outside, but also from like the kinds of police killings and killings from sheriffs that were happening throughout and still happening. But at the time, there was a lot of powerful participation from people to kind of do a lot of like street side memorials for people that were dying. And so I was really impacted by this, and thinking just further into what does it mean to kind of also place our sentiment and like grieving value onto these kinds of exterior spaces. And that led me to want to try something, and this is called a wall with sentiment. where, you know, I had spent a lot of time in the flower district, and there's a specific flower shop on Wall and Olympic where that flower shop there, they print these photographs of their flower crowns, and they hang the photographs outside on the stucco walls. And that really stuck to me for kind of inspiration. And I thought about, like, what if I was to create a kind of flower structure and place it on a wall that I have a sentimental, that I give sentimental value to, that I want to project sentiment onto, you know. And so I picked a wall that was in the neighborhood where I remember walking up and down growing up with my grandmother. And I've always kind of associated, you know, like bundles of flowers, white flowers specifically, to my grandmother. And so it was kind of a way to think about how, like, you know, she might not be, we might not necessarily have a place to where, like, that we grew up in or that we had access to with her, but like I can see her in other places, and I can see her outside, and I can see her, you know, on just the most kind of normal kinds of like topography in the city, and I can still feel her. And so that was like a way to kind of just place something momentarily, you know, make a photograph of that installation. And that kind of like draws me into this image, Búscala en las flores blancas, find her in the white flowers. And so this is actually an image that I made in 2022. It's not part of a landscape holds you still, but it's an image that I think kind of brings me back to my roots. This was a tree that was planted by my grandmother in Guadalajara in her patio of her home. She's passed since, but you know, this was a tree that still stands there to this day, and it gives off guayabas. And it was, and so, you know, I just did this like flower installation on the trunk of the tree, and then photographed that to kind of think about a way to practice like an acknowledgement of her, and to kind of connect to her, to work in the space and build a stronger connection through working in the space. So that's what I was doing with that. And so this is actually the last slide. And so we, if you want to take a couple moments to, you know, gather some thoughts, if we have some questions, but I just wanted to say, you know, in summary that, you know, expressions, staging, and rehearsals and memory become a vehicle to practice belonging with fluctuating temporality and an underlying status of impermanence. And, you know, the valley, which is often called the crater, is a no place and an ambiguous backdrop to what we see on films and streaming television, often set up to pass for other countries, fungible suburban neighborhoods, and past eras from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. As the valley is often coined as the land that never changes, with its aging strip malls, classic liquor stores, mid-century modern apartment complexes, and parking lots galore. You know, the valley is also a place that has a long history of spatial order and segregation, that was presented from its inception of suburbia doing what it's meant to do. And in my observation and participation of the construction and experience of people deemed peripheral to the middle and upper class white society, making place can exist as a pocket or an upspring that dissolves before they are caught onto, marked, removed, or surveilled, remaining in motion and constantly changing. I am called to make work around self-recognition outside of representation, establishing visual autonomy within the most visibly influential landscape in the world, Los Angeles. I'll say, and this is the last thing I'll say. In the case of applying memory to landscape, to have a cartographic understanding of memory, I think about the unarchived, the non-documented, and sometimes the unarchivable that exists because we construct place out of space through our sentimental projections and memory placing upon the site. All right, wow, there's so many comments. And thanks to everyone that tuned in. Amazing. Okay. So how do we jump into questions?
So there's a couple questions in the chat. One looks like it's from Jill Marie. Jill Marie, if you want to ask it, or if you want, Arlene can read it out. Or if anyone is interested in turning their video on and unmuting, you can ask Arlene the question directly as well. And Arlene, I'm dropping a couple of questions in so you can see them, so you don't have to scroll all the way up.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah, because like I can't scroll up.
Oh, and there's
Okay.
Jill Marie, so maybe she wants to ask you.
Oh,
Sure,
okay,
I'll
great.
ask you. Yeah. No, I really love your work. Thank you so much. This is beautiful, amazing work and a great presentation. I'm an MFA student at San Diego State, and I also work with landscape, and I'm also activating my family archive. So you've given me so many ideas, and I've been looking at your work for the last year or so, kind of online too. So anyway, just to anyway, what I was wondering is, I really love the way that you're activating these spaces with photographs and bringing photographs into the space and kind of, sort of this layering of like the space in the now and then the space of memory and layering this on top of each other. And I'm just wondering if you have ever kind of left the installation there and the community has kind of, whoever that community happens to be has interacted with it, or do you do that? Is that part of your practice? And then do you document that if that's part of your practice? Kind of, do you do that, and what do you do with it?
Oh, that's a great question, and that's so interesting. Yeah, you're close to me, and I'm excited to hear that we're working with some similar themes here. I would think that for me, when I've done the banner pieces, when I've done installations in specific places, there's been a level of reluctance to leave the work behind, mainly because I feel protective of the work. I feel protective of the objects that I'm bringing into the space. I don't necessarily want to impose or alter the landscape. That's why I kind of feel like it's a bit of a pop-up where I'm documenting a gesture in a moment. But I question, what would it be to leave something behind? Would it be intrusive to what the space is now? Because I'm coming in also like learning that sometimes these places change and they're not what they were. And so I kind of question that with the community, although these are all neighborhoods that I have a connection to, and some of them that I've lived in, or my family has lived in. It doesn't necessarily mean that I would there's a level of, I doesn't necessarily feel that I feel the freedom to leave something. I also don't know what would happen to it, because things are so impermanent and ephemeral, like in these public landscapes, something could disappear in just a few minutes, or who knows. Like, I just, it didn't necessarily feel like something that would maybe lead me to learn more, but maybe it could. I mean, with the banner works that I had done in the past, I did let them bake in the sun for a while and take on the rainwater patterns that are imprinted on them and things like that. So I do like the ways that ambient conditions and the weather and the exterior can alter these objects, but no, I haven't thought of doing that. I would be interested in doing something like that, but I would have to maybe really set an intentional kind of strategy for it. Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay. How do I find the next question?
So far, that's been the only question. There's a question earlier on. It was the photo of the banner behind the storefront. And somebody asked, what camera was this photo taken on?
Oh, this was with the RZ67 Mamiya. So, and with all of this work, I used mostly Kodak Gold for kind of a more illuminated gold feeling, you know, in the photo. And then I also used Ektachrome. Ektachrome is a slide film, color Kodak slide film that's was recently kind of revitalized, I believe. I understand it to also be the film that's used a lot for like filmmaking and shows. And I know like Euphoria, which is all filmed in the Valley, brought back Ektachrome to film their second season. And so I was thinking a lot about that too, like the relationship to kind of like films and movies. Yeah. I'm also open to comments if people don't have questions.
There is one question from.
Oh, okay, Rosalia.
Yeah. Do you want to
Yeah, if she wants to jump in, if not, I can do it. It says, so beautiful how you honor your familia, have your images speak and challenge stereotypes about the Valley, and also share struggles and resilience of Latinx communities. What were some challenges you faced in the process, and how did you overcome them? Challenges in the process of making the work. Well, I would say that a lot of my work, I started working from sketching. So I didn't necessarily, I think like being in San Diego, you kind of like are thinking a lot about a place, but you're not actually in it. And what was really helpful for me was like the sketching process and drawing, and really like drawing what would be inside the frame. And what happens is like once you're in the space, then you have to also abide by the environment, whether that's like the people that are there, or, you know, the weather, you know, there's an array of challenges that come up. And so that the mixture of like how you intend the image to be with also like what you're met with when you're actually in the space, like that combination is what becomes the image, you know, coordinating with people. I think sometimes I was at times a bit like, challenged and like shy maybe to ask friends to do this work. It's like really awkward to explain, you know, what I want. Like, I want you to like, you know, let me draw on your back, or like, I want you to like bring your child and like photograph them. And so like, you know, it's people that like understand art for art's sake. And so I'm really thankful to them. Or like asking my mom to, you know, pose in a pool when it's really cold, like, so things like that is like, you know, trying to like make sure that the people that I'm working with also felt like comfortable and open to the ideas. And so it was a lot of like really having to be very clear about my intention and explain things really well. And because you're also facilitating a process with others. So the collaborative, kind of like that collaborative process takes a lot of care and intention. Yeah. All right. How's your family responded to the work? I think that this work has needed to have a kind of like transformative value, in the sense of like, I wanted the process of making this work for there to be some kind of change or kind of growth from it with my family. So, you know, inviting people to participate, there was, you know, inviting them, kind of marking a new memory with them, inviting them to not just show up, but like maybe even offer something that they feel like, for example, Anna choosing like a specific park, Winnetka Park, where she has, you know, relationship to that park. It was a place that, you know, held her for many years, where she could take her kids as a single mom, and like, you know, this is a park that helped her raise them, but also like a place that doesn't always have the most pleasant memories, because we're working with complicated spaces. It's not, you know, all green pastures, obviously. So, you know, like we're complicating place too in that way. And so, you know, I think that's important, and just checking in with family. But I think overall the reception has been well. You know, they're participating, they're a part of it. I think they understand that they're a part of this work, and for it to serve them in some way, because you know, this work is also extending the archive, creating a new archive or a constellation of archives, you know, to be in conversation with each other. So you know, I think that's also part of it too, is like thinking about the future and how this is also part of their future. Yeah. So I'm excited to look through the chat. There's so many great comments and stuff.
Does anybody have any other questions for Arlene? Or comments? If you want to unmute and say something.
Mhm.
Nice.
Looking through my notes.
I have a question. Out of all the pictures you shared, what would you say is your favorite if you have to just choose one?
Yeah, it changes. I mean, it's funny, like I don't necessarily have a favorite, but you know, with the show and with the work that I was kind of drawn to different images at different times. And I think like, you know, working from kind of an intuitive place, I would, you know, make images and then I would look at them over time and start to learn more about them. And so each one gives every time, you know, like at different times. And so right now, I think I've really learned how to, or how would I rephrase this? The image, I remember drawing on my father's back with a ballpoint pen. That image has served as a vehicle for me to learn how to articulate a really complicated relationship to my father, relationship to memories with him. And so the image itself, kind of over time, like I was able to kind of unpack it and learn how to speak about it. And so if I hadn't made that image, I don't know if I would have had like the level of self-reflection that I do around my relationship to my father, but also like relationship to public space and memories with him. And then also to kind of like, it also allowed me to like remember something that I used to do and like remember it with more detail. And so that image really, and just, you know, in terms of the way it looks and aesthetically, it's like very much feels like the kind of work that I'm making right now and that I want to move forward with. So I would say right now maybe that one, but you know, they're all different ones. It alternates.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
We have another question from Trini Rodriguez. They're asking, what is calling you to do next with your work? And then there's another question after that, and then I think we'll probably wrap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So with this work, I just want to continue to have my studio practice, meaning that I want to continue to just be able to make photographs about the things that I care about. I think I am very much committed to kind of making work that pushes back at the way that representation is framed for my community and other communities that might see themselves in my work. And, you know, I care about anything that tries to corner us, confine us, flatten our experiences, define our experiences, anything that moves away from like the complexities and nuances that we are, like I want to push back at that. And so making work that is legible on different levels to different people, that that allows access on different levels to different people, like I care about that. And I want to be in conversation with other artists that are doing the same. Because I think it's like a moment, you know, to really do that. And so yeah, to continue with the studio practice where I can talk about these things freely without any restraints and not necessarily have to be tied to some kind of like commercial project, you know. And so everything that I do, I want it to kind of help sustain that practice, you know, whether it is taking like big commissions or, you know, gigs or jobs, but like to go back to like the heart of the work, you know. And then so the next question was by Walker. Hi Walker, how do you think of the relationship between the pictures with people versus without people? Do you separate those approaches conceptually at all? It's so funny that you're asking that question. I love that question because in 2020, when we couldn't really be around people, I learned how to photograph without people, and I still managed to put people in my photographs. So I was doing landscapes, but I was like still very much drawn to like, well, where are the people in these landscapes? You know, I thought a lot about like new topographics photographers and, you know, different kinds of landscape photography, and thinking how much like the Southwest is like fetishized and like what is like Southwestern photography, and we can draw this back to the roots of even just manifest destiny and the ways that the camera has always been a vehicle to kind of represent open, vast land that's available for the taking. And so thinking about like marking place with people and presence and meaning for different people, but also not in like a permanent way where we're perpetuating the same thing by marking it as like ours, but more so like saying like this place meant something to this person. That was kind of the message, I think, with that, with my work. And it's also like a way to kind of further your relationship to the land. So, I think that someone has commented before, like you kind of photograph landscapes, like if they're still portraits. And so, I was very familiar more with doing portraiture and working with people. But I think what's been new is the ways that I'm inserting like, presence, of people into the landscape in other ways that don't necessarily include bodies. And hi, Paul, thank you for the sweet message. One of my advisors, Paul. And then, okay, Raylene, I hope I said your name right. Do you have any advice for undergraduates considering for graduate school? Advice for undergrads, that's a really good question. I think that'll be the last question. I would say, let's see. I think aside from the typical, like you should research programs really well and whatnot. If you're thinking about going to grad school, I think you should ask yourself, like, what are like the top things that you're really looking for? Are you looking for mentorship? Are you looking for space, like studio space to make work in? Are you looking for a place that has like really great facilities that you need? And then also really looking at like faculty, who is in the department. I think those are really important things. And also thinking about talking to, I think you should like set up maybe some visits with MFA students at different departments and talk to them and see like, learn more about their practice and like, how does the program actually help their practice grow? What did they do after the program? And, I think that's like a good place to start. Sorry if that was like very generic answer, but it's kind of like probably maybe something you've heard before, but those things I think do really matter. And then funding, that's another one. And actually a really important part is that like there's MFAs throughout the whole country, right? But like make sure you're like going to a place that you feel like you could really be in and be creative and make work in. Because you might be surprised, you might be someone that wants to be in a more reclusive place or someone that wants to be in a city. So think about that. Celestia, yes, I will definitely write a rec letter for you any day. Okay. Okay, great. Glad you said the name right. Oh, I'm excited to look through this whole chat. Hello, Regina. Thank you for coming. All right. So thank you so much. Thank you to Eric so much for putting this entire thing together. I think it was, very generous of you to care to help me make my thesis project more accessible to the whole community. And thank you, Drew, for facilitating all of the, technical behind the scenes for this to happen. And thank you to everyone for coming and seeing this work, at least virtually for now, and hopefully somewhere in person in the future. Thank you. How do I save this chat?
Drew's gonna save it and he's gonna send it to us in a
Okay.
link with the video.
Perfect.
So cool. Thanks, Arlene.
Thank you.